Thank you so much, musicians, for leading us in that beautiful hymn to commence our morning of worship here this morning. As I mentioned earlier, our brother Paul and sister Paul are here from Gosford this morning, and our brother Paul is to lead us in the words of exhortation, which we're thrilled to have their company with us, and we're looking forward to those thoughts. He's asked that we take a reading from Isaiah chapter 55 to introduce his thoughts to us, and we're going to ask our brother Reuben Norton to come forward and read that for us. Thanks, Reuben. All right, I think we're getting close to settle. There are window sills for Eutychus in case. All right, so without further ado, we'll invite our brother Paul Yearsley to come forward with the theme God's Mercy for our exhortation. Thanks, Paul.
How are we going? Good morning. Wow, there's a lot of you guys here. First of all, I've got an apology to make. This exhortation is one in a series I've been doing with the Hunter Valley Ecclesia in their Bible class. So for all you guys from Lismore, I think it was May this year, we did the same series. So I said to Andy last night at the wedding, Andy Norton, I said, man, why do you guys have to come to Hunter Valley? Go somewhere else, you've heard this before. You know what he said to me? He goes, oh, don't worry, it's sort of like eating a bowl of spaghetti for the second time. It's always better the second time around. So I hope you enjoy the bowl of spaghetti. Oh, good on you, Andy. Love you. Okay, where are we going? All right, so so we've been doing this theme on tracking the life of David, and it's under the theme of to dance like David, dance like that king, the dance of your life. And today we're going to focus on the sure mercies of David. But just to backtrack a little bit, we've been sort of focusing on David's attachment and passion and obsession with the Ark of the Covenant, and bringing that Ark of the Covenant to what he knew to be Jerusalem. He was very privileged to be told that's where that place was going to come, that Ark was going to come to rest. But when you reflect on what the purpose of the tabernacle, and particularly the ark, and essentially around the mercy seat, it's where God made this statement about how he wanted to connect with his people, you and me, and to dwell with us. And it was very specific where he wanted to dwell. He's going to meet with us on that mercy seat. That was his statement way back there. And it was always about us meeting with him based on, remember what was in the Ark of the Covenant, there was the 10 Commandments, so it was always based on his people that he would connect with and dwell with, respecting his values, his commandments, his laws. And no matter how hard you tried, no matter who we are, no matter how great our connection is, our spirituality, we're always going to be dependent upon the mercy of God. And in the dance of David's life, you saw someone who, as I said, had his life's passion was to bring this ark to Jerusalem, to make it the centerpiece of his nation, to honour God, so his people would connect with God like he did. The dance of his whole life embodied what that ark was all about. He was someone who deeply connected, as we've been seeing, with his God. He certainly loved his values, and he loved being with his friends, people who honoured God in the same way. But I read a psalm that I want you to look at that he wrote, Psalm 17, and this phrase appears a few times, written by David. He says, "Show me your marvellous loving kindness. Keep me as the apple of your eye. Hide me under the shadow of your wings." And I want you to think about that for a minute in the context of what we've been speaking about. You know, the context of God's overshadowing like an eagle hovering over its young. But think about it in the context of the ark. Where were the wings on the ark? It was just above the mercy seat. I want to rejoice in your loving kindness. So I settle under the wings, shadow of those wings, based on your mercy. And he's such a powerful It's such a powerful story to me because he's so spiritually connected with his God. But even him, a man after God's own heart, was imperfect, inconsistent. And in moments of his life, he was a downright joke. There was no lower point in his life than what we're going to talk about this morning with his sin with Bathsheba. We had a couple of those verses again that we read in Isaiah 55. So I'm going to read, just pick up, it's such a beautiful chapter, isn't it? I was reading it again. I'd like to talk about some other stuff as well, but let's focus on verse 3. Incline your ear and come to me. Hear and your soul shall live, and I will make an everlasting covenant with you. Show mercies. Indeed, I've given him witness to the people. If you jump down to verse 6, seek the Lord while he may be found, call upon him while he is near. Take away the unrighteous man his thoughts. Let him return to the Lord, and he will have mercy on him, and to our God, and he will abundantly pardon. How beautiful is that? And this is God's statement. And when you look at David, David is this, he's this massive statement, a message and a witness of his mercy. And I suppose when you think about his life and that event, it's really in two ways. It's the depth of his grace, how far God extended that grace and mercy, and how deep it was, because what he did, as you all know, and I know, this was such an horrific sin. This is not just any sort of, I had an evil thought. This is horrific and grotesque. And David himself, a man of high integrity, if he was judging himself, he said, you shall die. Remember the story when Nathan said that, come to him? His assessment was, you got to die. And in that section we just read, we didn't read it. So let's read verse 8 in chapter 55. It says, but my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, says the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. God's ways are so much greater, so deeper, so rich compared to man's. Yes, David would live and have a horrendous life after this event. He would live with the consequences, which is the thing that happens with sin. But the depth of God's grace and mercy is far beyond what you could even comprehend, you and I. So that's number one, the depth of his grace. But number two was that I think in this whole story, if you think about it, he's the king of Israel, loved by his people. He commits adultery and murder. He should, technically under the law, been publicly stoned before the people under the law of Moses, yeah? That's what the law demanded. So why on earth did that not occur? And it's because Isaiah 55 says he's a witness of my mercy. This is a cameo of the new covenant that was to come in the Messiah, with the Messiah. That despite sin, it could live forever. And the key was just reconnecting and dwelling with God again. And he's a witness for every human being that's ever lived or after him. Because we or they can be beneficiaries of an everlasting covenant. So cool. So let's go to the story. I'm only going to pick out a couple of little things. We spent a lot of time on this whole story, but I just want to hone in on a couple of little aspects of this story which means so much to me in terms of this concept of the depth of God's grace. So in 2 Samuel 11, you know the whole story really, but I want to just really emphasise the depth of evil, first of all, that's going on here. Who was Bathsheba and Uriah? Well, we're told in verse 3 of 2 Samuel 11 that Bathsheba was the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Let's focus on these guys for a second. So Uriah is the last mighty man mentioned in 2 Samuel 23. And Eliam, according to Jewish tradition, is the same Eliam that's mentioned as another mighty man in 2 Samuel 23. So I want you to process that for a minute and who these mighty men were and the depth of connection between David and his mighty men. These were men that were inspired by David. They killed many giants as they remembered and done all these incredible brave acts because they were following a young teenager that killed a giant called Goliath. In 2 Samuel 23, do you remember that? David says, I'm so thirsty, I wish we could go to Bethlehem for a drink. And some of those mighty men went on this dangerous journey, a return journey of 40 kilometres to go to Bethlehem and drag some water out of that well and bring it back to David. And David was so moved by that, he said, I can't even drink it, and he poured it on the ground. Remember that story? That's the depth of love that they had for him. In 2 Samuel 21, when David was aging and he became faint in battle and he was almost killed by a giant, those mighty men surrounded him and he was saved by Abishai. And those men got together and they made a statement that day, and they said this statement which was, we don't want you ever to go to battle again lest the lamp of Israel go out. Remember that? They saw him as the lamp. They fought alongside him. They trained together. They shed blood together. They guarded him. They were his bodyguard. They worshipped together. They sat around the fire talking about spiritual concepts and understanding his spiritual mind. There was a deep love and a connection with this guy. As they patched their wounds together from battles and stitched each other up, there was a bond that you could not understand unless you're in that situation. He was their inspiration. He was their example. He was their mentor. And the last chat we had at Bible class was when that incredible story about him bringing the ark to Jerusalem and all the spiritual concepts that David was desperate to bring out as he acted like a king priest. And in that procession, he walked with those mighty men. As they were just going, yeah, we love this, David. We want to be with you. We understand the concepts of the future Messiah that you've taught us. We've spoken about this many times. So there was this deep connection and spirituality. These guys, as they hung with David, they were tight. But what about specifically Uriah? Do we get any insights into Uriah? Well, I think we do. If you look in 2 Samuel 11 here in verse 11, you remember the story where he's gone into Bathsheba and he calls Uriah back and she's with a child. He calls Uriah back and says, I want you to go down and sleep with your wife. Read this statement very carefully with me in verse 11. Uriah said to David, the ark and Israel and Judah are dwelling in tents, and my lord Joab and the servants of my lord are encamped in the open fields. I'll then go to my house to eat and drink, to lie with my wife. As you live, and as your soul lives, I will not do this thing. Immediately, you get an impression of Uriah as a man of high integrity. He wasn't going to have any comfort in his own house when his own men were sleeping in the fields in a battle. There's no way he was going to do that and enjoy the luxuries of his own home. So he's a man of integrity, a man of honour. But why does he say, it's kind of weird how he says, the ark in Israel and Judah are intense. He mentions that first. Studies for those that were there. In Psalm 132, David had there's this psalm about David's passion for the ark, and he says this is my whole life's goal, and I'm never going to take comfort. He says, I'll not go to the chamber of my house, or go to the comfort of my bed until I find a dwelling place for the mighty one of Jacob. So I think, to me, what I think Uriah is saying to David, he's saying to him, you know how it feels. You can't sleep with unfinished business. Your whole life's passion is to bring that ark to Jerusalem, and it's a noble cause, and I'll follow you to the ends of the earth to do that. So you understand what it means when you can't sleep with unfinished business. And I'm in the middle of a war for you. I can't sleep until I've got that business finished. And I think, can you imagine David hearing those words? As Uriah was essentially saying, I'm inspired by your integrity. I'm inspired by your passion and your honour. And I can imagine if I was David, can you imagine if you were David hearing those words, you would be going, fire out. This is like looking in the mirror. This guy is deeply connected. He's a man of honour and integrity. And at that moment, he just should have got down on his knees and said, Uriah, I've got to tell you a story. David did not do that. He couldn't face the shame. He couldn't confess. And he moved on. And within a short period of time, Uriah lay dead, motionless in a battle. He shouldn't have been there. That is grotesque and horrific. When you think about it, before and after David was exposed, even before Nathan came to him, he was, I'll just read a couple of Psalms. You know some of these Psalms. Psalm 32, Psalm 38, he was a broken unit. He said things like, the way I feel now that I've done this, it's like my vitality, it's like the drought of summer. Psalm 51, probably know well, it says, he's broken. He's saying to God, create in me a clean heart. I know you won't despise a broken and contrite spirit. Can you see what I mean when the whole concepts of the mercy seat on that ark, hiding under the shadow of God's wings, come to play out David's life? David was forgiven because of the depth of God's grace. But sometimes I think it is true that you know that God can forgive you. But I know if I'd done that, I'd find it really hard to forgive myself. You think about the shame that he would have felt as he faced his people in events, and the world knew what he had done to the most noble, closest of his friends, his family. And at family functions, at barbecues with Eliam standing, shame and the brokenness that David felt. So even though he was forgiven by God in the most amazing way, he had to believe that mercy really applied to him. Love this. This is God talking. Dwell with him, to contrite and a humble spirit. I love these words. To revive spirit of the humble and to revive the heart of the contrite ones. God's in the mode of reviving us from the situations of our life when we've gone into those dark places. And what's amazing to me about this whole story is the revival that God instigated with David was in the form of Solomon. So you remember the story of Solomon. Even before Solomon was born, and prior to Bathsheba, God had made a promise to David in 1 Chronicles 21. He says, the son's going to be born to you. He's going to be a man of enemies around, and his name's going to be even born. He said, I want you to name him Solomon. And in the story of the adultery with Bathsheba, remember how that story plays out. She has the baby, and the baby dies. And they get through all that. If you look at 2 Samuel 12, the next part of the story, it says in verse 24, after all that horrible experience, 2 Samuel 12:24, it says, David comforted Bathsheba, his wife, went into her and lay with her, so she bore a son, and he called his name Solomon, and Yahweh loved him. He sent word by the hand of Nathan the prophet, so he called his name Jedediah, as of Goah. Just want you to think about that for a minute. I love this, how God's trying to revive David through this experience where he'd made a promise about this son Solomon, whose name means peace. And Bathsheba is now a child, has a baby, and says, I want you to call just the kid. And I'm still hanging with you about my promise. I want you to have peace. And interestingly, we read that in verse 24, it says, David comforted Bathsheba, his wife, when in chapter 11, 26, chapter 12, 10 and 15, she's referred to as Uriah's wife, or now God says, your wife. And he also, in these verses we read, he says that he sent Nathan and told David that Solomon's loved. As a response, David seemingly gives him a nickname, Jedediah. I want you to process this for a minute because, as you know, David's name means beloved. Jedediah means beloved Yahweh. So to me, what is happening here is that God is telling him, I still love you. I want you to be at peace. You are beloved and you're still beloved. And when you think about, the consequences of David's sin, those, the baby that died, the death of two, three other sons, the turmoil in his house, he lived with all those horrific consequences. The thing that he could continue on with in life, regardless of all that horrendous life he had. It's these things which he made prominent on. Psalm 40 says, I am poor and needy, yet the Lord thinks upon me. I love Psalm 30, he says, his anger is but for a moment, but his favour is for life. And as he processed and went to worship at the tent or the tabernacle, whatever it was at the time, wherever he went, he says, I'm going to come into your house, into the multitudes of your mercy. So that brings it to us, doesn't it? I want you to think, and I need to think about the dance of our lives. You see yourself in David, where you spend your whole life, you grow from a kid upwards, whenever you hear the gospel. You spend your life trying to connect, to dwell with God. You love him. You want to find a resting place with God. And there's times in your life when you honour him with holy, because you respect and value his holiness, and you connect deeply with him spiritually. But with all of us, there's this dark side that manifests itself from time to time. And our inconsistencies, our weaknesses, our faults, so obvious, horrific in a lot of ways. And we may not think, we might sort of start processing and go, I've never committed adultery or even murder of one of my closest friends. But we need to get to the point where we understand the grossness of our own personal evil. If an angel appeared and extracted you from the audience, and extracted me, we were forced to sit and watch a video screen of our life. And we reviewed our life, of all the moments of our life, where you saw footage of events where you were rude, you or I were rude, or we talked about others in a malicious way, where we were contentious or we were negative. We pointed fingers at others when we should have looked at ourselves. When we were dishonest or lacked integrity, where we neglected those in need, we sort of fought over things that weren't important and didn't fight for the things that are. And imagine how you would feel if you watched that footage right now with your personal angel. But even more so, all the casual events of your life where your thoughts and your intentions were just started to pop up as you saw footage of those events. Where there was jealousy and hatred and pride and anger and arrogance. And there was these kind of thoughts, well, if I do this, God owes me. The legalistic mindset that might come up. Or perhaps what flashed up was the data centre of all the internet sites we'd been to and wiped in our shame. We soon get a very ugly picture of who we are in comparison to God's holiness. When we're truly dancing like the King, we reflect on all that and we go, what, I want to dwell with you, I want to reconnect with you. And we understand and we become broken because we're so far removed from where we really want to be. The message from this whole story from Isaiah is seek him, turn back, forsake evil, reconnect. And this Isaiah 55 is, David is the witness, it says, that his mercies are sure. So regardless of our past, our failures and our inconsistencies in our past and in the future, it's still going to continue. We need to believe that we're Jedediah, still loved of God. Now we're going to take the emblems and we're going to reflect on Jesus, who is our mercy seat. He's greater than David, the root and offspring of David. And when we were baptised and made this covenant, and we became heirs to the promises of David, his sure mercies. And in a sense, when we take that bread and wine now, we're going to meet him on the mercy seat under the shadow of his wings. How awesome is that? I just want to finish in, just come across to 2 Samuel 23. These are the last words of David, and incidentally, they're in the same chapter as the list of all the mighty men. Talk about the new covenant. Think about how many mighty men weren't even part of Israel. They came into Israel. Uriah the Hittite, and so on. It's got new covenant written all over this. But listen to the last words of David, echoing to us thousands of years after he stated them. He says in 2 Samuel 23, in verse 3, he says, "The God of Israel said," imagine this old man rattling off these words. God of Israel said, "Rock of Israel spoke to me. He who rules over men must be just, ruling in the fear of God. And he shall be like the light of the morning when the sun rises, a morning without clouds, like the tender grass springing out of the earth by clear shining after rain. You know, when we lived in Fitzroy Falls, before we come up to the Central Coast, we lived in this little village, and opposite our village there was a sort of a main road, and there was a national park, and I would wake up in the morning, could stand on our veranda or look out the window facing east. And I still love the mornings where the sun would come through the trees of the forest after the rain and sparkle on the tree. It was like the most beautiful picture. That's what David's saying. A man who rules. That's what he's saying his world should be like. It should be perfect. But read on. Although my house is not so with God, yet he has made with me an everlasting covenant, ordered in all things and secure. For this is all my desire. This is all my desire. This is all my salvation, all my desire. Will he not make it peace? What beautiful words, brothers and sisters. And as we take these emblems and share this together as a family and reflect on the inconsistencies and the failures and the mistakes and the grotesque sins of our own personal lives, we've got to remember that even though our house is not so with God, he's made us an everlasting covenant, ordered in all things and secure. He's given us the sure mercies of David, and we can now sit under the shadow of those wings, be beneficiaries of his amazing